Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for yet another alumni interview. My name is Luke Lombard, and I'm the Junior Executive of Member Engagement for the Haskayne Consulting Club. And today we're really excited to introduce to you our second series of our alumni interviews. And this, in fact, is the very first video of that series. And this series is titled Specializations and Technicals. And what we're trying to do is essentially teach our members what specific techniques, and what specific specializations they might need in the consulting world, and also how they can attain those either through school or through extracurriculars. Of course, would like to thank George for being with us here today. And as always, I'd like to start it off by asking, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your past involvements in HCC, what your degree was, and anything else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, sure. Not a problem, Luke. Thanks again for having me. I'm super excited to be here. So as anyone reading this or watching this might have seen in the introduction kind of blurb already about me, I'm an HCC alumni about, I think, 3 years ago now. So 2018, 2019, in that range. Or no, 2017, 2018, sorry. In that range, I was a part of HCC as kind of an engineering ambassador. At that point, that role wasn't really defined, right? HCC was, I think, in its infancy, only its second year. And so it was kind of more of a catch-all role for the one person that was more or less responsible for STEM engagement, understanding how STEM degrees and consulting more or less click. So that was kind of my role. Besides that, I mean, I was a major in engineering, more specifically mechanical engineering with a minor in mechatronics. Prior experience had all been kind of energy-based, very technical, did a lot of research in school. So very hardcore kind of like STEM keener background, if you will, right? No real business experience, no real finance experience, but I could do any engineering math you really needed. From there, though, I kind of thought that Eng, in terms of the actual problem solving, the actual kind of face-to-face kind of work style wasn't necessarily for me. So kind of wanted to make that pivot to consulting. So joined HCC as well as a few other clubs. And then from there, interviewed with a bunch of firms and chose to go with Accenture in their strategy kind of team as a strategy analyst. So I've been there now for about coming on 2 years, I think about 1 year and 7 months, and really liking it so far.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And, I know we have a lot of members who are from engineering specifically, and we always are trying to grow that more and more, just because, we see individuals such as yourself who make that transition into consulting from a non-business related field. And we kind of want to let people know that that is a possibility and that they can do that. So that's great to hear. And I'm happy we have some non-business representation in one of these interviews for sure. And, of course, on the same theme of your degree, can you summarize your degree for us? And can you maybe touch on a few of those core points in your degree that you learned about that were really the big takeaways?
Yeah, for sure. I think this one's a bit less conventional, like you said, right? No real direct courses that were a one-to-one into consulting, right? And nothing finance, nothing marketing, et cetera, really related. But I will say, in terms of actual engineering, in nearly all my courses, what was developed is kind of a problem-solving skill set that's really, really, really important for consulting, right? So I never necessarily worked with any business values, right? They were more about, say, the tensile strength of a bridge or a metal rod or something like that. But the gist was, the purpose of those courses was to have you look at one question with 50 data points and have you work out an answer, right? It wasn't like a rigid, oh, I plug in this formula and I get the answer. It was, I kind of had to search for the framework, search for where the formulas and the numbers really lie and how they arrange themselves, and kind of manipulate them into a framework that solves the problem. And I think if you were to really boil down consulting into its rawest form, then you're going to go like 10 levels up. That kind of is consulting in a nutshell. So I think those skills carried over really well. I think you find those a lot in engineering courses, and I'm sure you find those a lot in various business courses as well.
For sure. And to follow up on that, I wanted to ask you, how do you find that transition kind of from having a really technical, specialized background? Was it hard to learn some of that business jargon, for lack of a better word, and kind of some of those techniques off the start, or did you find that transition relatively easy?
Yeah, I will say, in the actual recruitment process, especially with case interviews, there's a bit of a learning curve in terms of kind of like some of the key metrics businesses kind of evaluate, some of the key frameworks they can learn in business school. I helped conduct some case interviews, or helped, I guess, create some case interviews for Accenture recently. And so upon redoing them, now that I have more of a business kind of bent skill set, infinitely easier, like a lot easier. So that's definitely something where I think STEM majors do have to learn a bit more. But at the end of the day, I think still case studies, frameworks, etc., are still just fundamentally problem solving, kind of with a business skin on top. So that was the big learning curve. In terms of actually what I do at work, and whether or not the business major would have been really helpful there, I'd say it's 50-50, right? On one half my day is spent in Excel, sometimes even coding, just more or less dealing with like very quantitative problems. In that case, I think my Eng background is hugely beneficial, hugely advantageous, right? I think I can kind of sort through those problems very quickly. The other half is spent kind of driving stakeholder engagement, conducting workshops, right? Trying to get a big group of people to kind of ID on solutions, and as well as financial modeling even. And that kind of stuff's much more business related, right? If you have a business degree, you'll definitely have a big or an easier time doing it. But at the end of the day, it's nothing you can't learn within your first few months at the firm. And the firm has plenty of resources to kind of help accelerate your journey and get you on that baseline you need. So I'd say yes, there are some things that you miss with a STEM degree, but at the same time, there are some very valuable things you gain. So I think the trade-offs are worth it.
Of course, yeah. As a business student myself, I've always thought it's great that I have all this business knowledge, but unlike you, I'm not sure that I could just pick up mechanical engineering in a few months, if that kind of makes sense. So it's nice that, it's just that transition was relatively easy for you, and also didn't take a ton of time. I definitely think that's always been a benefit for, engineering, STEM students and the likes. So yeah, that's great to hear. And again, I think a lot of our students are really going to appreciate that, and hopefully that'll kind of excite them a little bit. And sort of just staying on the same theme of your degree, the last kind of question I wanted to ask was, have you found your degree super applicable in your current role? So I know that you did touch on, you sort of use that 50% of your mechanical degree and then 50% of the business side. Have you found that, like, was mechanical engineering the best way to take it, or uh, just what are your thoughts on that in general, kind of?
Right. Uh, well, I think to backtrack even a bit, I would say that if I could redo my degree, knowing that I would end up in consulting, probably would not do an engineering degree, right? Again, you build those kind of problem solving skills, but you're not building any hard technical skills that are super relevant, right? If I could redo my degree, I think I would definitely major in something like finance, and then potentially minor in something like computer science, because you're kind of getting the soft skills as well as the hard skills. That being said, though, I would say that consulting is kind of what you make of it, right? It's not this 100% mold where, oh, I needed 20% problem solving, 30% coding, 40% finance skills, or else I can't really cut it as a consultant, right? There's a huge variety of projects, and it's really up to you which ones you want to take. You can kind of build a reputation within your firm as being a very qualitative workshop design thinking kind of individual, or as a much more quantitative kind of in the weeds with Excel, with code kind of problem solver. So it's kind of like, what do you want to do? Does that really match with what you've learned? And then does that really match with what you can do at the firm? So kind of a non-answer, right? As always, I feel like you're getting a lot of non-answers with these series. But that's kind of the point, right? It is what you make of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. And I think that kind of brings irony to this series in itself. We say it's supposed to be about specializations and technical things that you can learn, but I think it's actually really reassuring, especially even to a lot of people that I know, that you kind of fit into this mold of consulting rather than like you becoming the shape that fits in it, if that makes sense. Um, so I think, again, that's like another reassuring thing, and definitely a reassuring thing for, as I continue to say, STEM students and engineering students alike. So kind of moving out of that, still staying on that technical theme though, I was wondering, in your role, or even in school, were there any very specific technical skills that you managed to learn, that have been most useful now? So maybe a good example is, like you said, Accenture has a lot of resources. Is there something Accenture taught you that it's like, wow, I cannot believe my life without knowing this anymore? Or is
Yeah,
there something like that, or a few things even?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I think I narrowed it down to two. One I didn't learn that I wish I had, and one that I did learn that was super useful that a lot of individuals in consulting might not have. So the first one is definitely financial modeling, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I took two econ courses. All engineers do have to take two kind of minor econ courses, but like I mean, like capex versus opex, supply and demand is only going to get you so far, right? There are projects. I was on one where I had to build a full-fledged leverage buyout model, right? The whole 600 lines, rows, right? The whole 9 miles. So I mean, if I had a finance major, it'd be a lot easier. I'd have a lot less stressful nights where I was looking at YouTube tutorials and trying to go through templates, trying to connect the dots of all the formulas, right? So that's one skill that's super useful that I wish I learned. In terms of skills that I did learn in school that ended up being super, super useful would definitely be coding. I'm definitely not a computer scientist, right? I'm not going to write like a very fancy algorithm to do something crazy, some search or sort algorithm, but I can at least use code to kind of analyze data, run some like machine learning tools, etc. Right? Stuff that you can really learn in like a month-long boot camp if you're really dedicated to it, or in 1 or 2 courses. But that kind of stuff kind of opens doors for you in consulting in terms of getting projects that not everyone can do, because coding is definitely not a prereq for consulting, and it shouldn't be, because I'd say 90% of projects you wouldn't even touch code. But there exists kind of a subset, a 10% of projects that I personally think are very cool, but they might not staff someone who isn't familiar with at least some sort of coding logic as well as the ability to kind of implement code. So for example, right now I'm on a project where we're looking at the entire US and kind of dividing it into individual census blocks. And in each census block, we're seeing if, say, X amount of telecommunications providers were to enter those blocks, how would consumer prices change across all 30,000 or 100,000 of those tracks, and then aggregate that to a national level. So in my opinion, really cool stuff. And when they were trying to staff that, one of the prereqs was, can you code? Are you comfortable with kind of different supervised machine learning models, etc. So I was one of the few people that could apply for that role and actually get that role, right? So that was a big advantage there. If I couldn't code, I just wouldn't have gotten that role, and I would have done one of another 100 roles that don't require coding, right? So it wasn't the end of the world, but it really opened the doors to some really cool projects I'm into. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally reasonable. I definitely think a lot of the other people that I've chatted with have said, coding is a pretty big part of consulting, but only to the extent of, like you said, it's a big part only in certain projects, and then other projects, it's just non-existent almost. So it's
Yeah.
funny that you sort of, bring back up that and also like mention that. I think that hopefully, again, like everything, will just reassure people like, okay, you don't need to have a degree in computer science to be a consultant, but a little bit of knowledge goes a long way, I guess. That's another part of it. Um,
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think for students looking at consulting, definitely look into the nuance of what your role requires, right? Because there's definitely technology consulting at the big four firms, at Accenture, at the MBB firms, where those individuals code every day. That's part of the requirement is you're dealing with organizations, maybe kind of analytics challenges or IT challenges. Whereas there's more management strategic consulting where it's more about ideating on the problems, right? Where you're not expected to code. And that kind of consulting is where I'm really talking about the 90% not needing to code, 10% needing. Make sure you're not applying for a role where you need to code every single day, but you can't code, right? Yeah.
yeah, no, fair enough. That's probably a good clarification now that you bring it up. I wasn't considering that, but uh, mind you, I've made enough mistakes applying to jobs that it's probably a good piece of advice.
Oh, me as well.
Yeah, so you kind of answered that fifth question that I had for you in that last part, but I wanted to ask, maybe is there any advice that you wish you knew, or is there anything that you want to tell people, or just like kind of that general closing talk show type of question? Of anything that comes to mind, feel free to just blurt it out, and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Okay, awesome. I would say just go in with the expectation, not really the expectation, but the understanding that um, consulting is something that really lets you keep your doors open, which is awesome, right? Like as an engineer, for example, I knew I didn't want to do engineering, but I had no freaking clue what I did want to do beyond that, right? So consulting's that great kind of middle option where I'm allowed to really solve a lot of business problems today. I'm allowed to solve a lot of more technical problems today. But tomorrow, I'm free to either kind of stick with the firm and make it as a managing director or a partner, depending on what firm you're at, or potentially exit to roles that are either more centered towards like technical analysis, right? So you can be a data analyst, if you have the skills, maybe still a software engineer, or I could exit to roles that are much more business operations strategy focused, right? Or even a corporate strategy role where I'm much more focused on actual finance. So I think consulting is a very viable career path, but also understand that it can be a great option if you don't know what you want to do. And 5 to 10 years down the line, you still want to keep your options really, really open. I think at my firm, I see 10 people exiting to 10 completely different roles all the time, right? So I think that's one of the best parts of it.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's a good piece of advice, and I definitely think, especially just how much everything's changing. I know that sounds like a cliche at this point, but it is a good idea probably to keep your options open, just because there's a chance that in 10 years, you know, your role might change to something you don't like so much anymore. But yeah, no, that's great advice. Yeah, for sure. And I mean,
Yeah,
with that, of course, you know, I want to thank you for willing to come out, willing to chat. And you know, all of our alumni have been super, I guess willing is the only word I can think of to do this. So we really want to, you know, of course, thank you for doing that. And thanks again for taking the time. And we really hope a lot of our students see a lot of value in this.
yeah, no problem. And I would say to anyone watching this that if you want to connect, if you have any questions about consulting or Accenture or even Accenture strategy more specifically, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, reach out, ping, email, whatever it is. Happy to chat
Yeah, that's great to hear. Hopefully, some people will take advantage of that.
anytime.
Yeah, and with that, you know, thanks for joining us again, George. And to everyone else, we'll see you at the next interview.
Sweet.